This is Mehul Mankad, and here I have Mike McGuire. Happy to have you with us.
Glad to be here, Mehul.
We're going to be talking about motivational interviewing, but first, Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Just briefly, I just got back from Germany after a few years over there working with military families that were dealing with transition issues. And now I'm working at the School of Social Work at the University of North Carolina as a professor there.
Great.
Assistant professor. I'm licensed in a few different ways for the counseling world as an addiction specialist, a marriage and family therapist, a clinical social worker. And I think what brings me here, besides my interest in working with veterans, is that I'm what they call a MENT trainer, a motivational interviewing national trainer, and happy to be here.
Great. Now, I got to admit, I may accidentally call you Mark McGuire.
Won't be the first time.
That's my bad.
Yeah. I brought a bat just in case, and
right.
Good. I can take a swing.
Yeah, right.
So, okay.
So, tell us, what is motivational interviewing?
Well, let me start with kind of the formal definition that the motivational interviewers, developers came up with. The motivational interviewers say that motivational interviewing is a collaborative conversation style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. My short version is that it's simply a way to talk to someone about making a change in their life. MI is both a set of techniques and a counseling style or an approach to counseling. It relies on identifying and mobilizing the client's intrinsic values and goals to stimulate behavior change, in a nutshell.
So it's about helping somebody make a change?
It's exactly what it is. It's as simple as that. We're trying to help people make change. And in fact, to kind of get us in the mood, if you will, for this conversation today about motivational interviewing, try this, and viewers, please try this as well. Think of something in your life that you have thought about changing, but as of yet have not changed it. People may choose things like starting an exercise program or stop smoking. Maybe it's going back to school or giving up coffee, whatever it is. Choose one of these things and just roll it around in your mind a little bit and just notice some of the reasons for change and some of the reasons you haven't changed so far. And I'm going to pause just for a moment while you roll that around. Now, with that change, imagine that I, pretty much a stranger, imagine I begin to push you. More than nudge, I begin to push you with a sense of hurriedness into making that change. I say, you need to do this now. Now's the time. What would this feel like for you?
I'm going to feel defensive, to be honest.
And that's probably the number one response we get. People will feel defensive. I'm beginning to push my agenda on them already. Now, once in a while, someone in the back of the room, if I do this with a larger group, will raise their hand and say, I kind of like that. I like that he pushed me. I needed something to get over the line.
A kick in the pants.
A kick in the pants, and that does work for some people. Yeah. But those are few and far between. And even those, I suspect that even those folks, some of them, have what I call the Dr. Phil fail. They make a quick commitment, but it's followed by a quick return to old behaviors.
So like maybe a yo-yo diet is an example?
I lose 10, I gain 15. Absolutely. Now, following this exercise, this is a good time for me to introduce a couple of important components of MI. Two that I want to bring out early on. One is called the writing reflex, like you write something. This is the instinct that many of us have to want to fix problems that other people have. We're fixers. In fact, it's maybe what led you into your field, me into mine, and VSOs into your fields. We want to help by fixing problems. That's called the writing reflex. Another concept is that of ambivalence. This is the pros and cons list, the argument in our minds about why we should change or why we shouldn't change. Now, what happens when we have a helper or counselor? I'll use those terms interchangeably. What happens when we have a helper or counselor and we throw them in a room with somebody who's ambivalent? Now, the helper counselor wants to help, wants to fix quickly. They move to fix things. The writing reflex kicks in. Next to them, you have someone who's ambivalent over some kind of change in their life. We lock the door and walk away. What happens? That person who is the client in this case begins to feel defensive as you did. They're not ready for a change. Where the helper thinks, what's wrong with this guy? Here I am trying to help. I got the solution. They just have to listen to me. So we're setting them up to fail. One person who wants to fix the problem, the other who doesn't.
You've really got me thinking about this and finding ways to avoid that exact scenario. Give us an idea of the background of motivational interviewing.
Well, let me start with the developers.
Sure.
Bill Miller is a guy who really stumbled upon motivational interviewing back in the early 80s.
Okay.
He just found that it was a different approach to talk to people than what he was seeing in the world of addiction treatment at the time. He teamed up with a guy named Steve Rolnick in the early 90s, and together they're considered the developers, the founders of motivational interviewing. Although they're quick to say that they stood on the shoulders of many before them. For example, Carl Rogers and his person-centered therapy. And also two guys named Prochaska and DiClemente.
That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. And there's a guy named Norcross that helped them out as well. So these two or three guys did put something together called a trans-theoretical model for change, which sounds a little highbrow, but it's really just the stages that people go through when they make a change.
So, Mike, tell us a little bit about who would be using motivational interviewing techniques.
You know, MI techniques are now used throughout the world by lots of different professionals. For example, in the mental health field, it's used by psychologists, therapists, counselors, psychiatrists. In the health field, it's used by physicians and nurses. Dentists use it now, teachers, and even law enforcement officers.
What kinds of issues would all of these different people use motivational interviewing for?
Well, if we look at the health field, we're talking about diabetes, medication adherence, hypertension, exercise, safe sex, certainly used in the substance use and addictions field.
Okay.
All kinds of mental health issues, it's used in that arena. And I'm particularly interested in how law enforcement is using this. In one of many ways is they're beginning to use this in their jails and prisons. And why? They find that using MI, the staff using MI and being trained, it helps to humanize the corrections environment. It prevents staff burnout. It reduces resistance, which also helps them gather more information from their population. And it provides a structure for helping these folks change some of their behaviors, which is really the basis for reform.
Wow.
Now, it's also used for veterans issues like homelessness and mental health issues, physical issues, substance use, and now, hopefully soon, with the VSOs.
Of course, the real question is, does any of this work?
Does it work? The short answer is yes. Not for all people, not for all issues. But there's now been over 1,200 publications about this model, over 200 randomized clinical trials, and meta-analyses.
Now, randomized clinical trials are the highest level of evidence available, and you're saying there's over 200 of these showing that it works.
That's exactly right.
And meta-analysis, my understanding, is when they take data from multiple trials and put it together to increase the power.
And still see if it works.
Right.
And Mehul, it's been around and studied so much now, there's now meta-analyses on the meta-analyses. So
Wow.
There's a lot of information out there. Here's what they're finding. There's a wide variation, but they see that it's had both efficacy, means it works in a research lab, but also effectiveness, which means it works in the real world.
Where it counts.
Where it counts. How does it work? It increases the client's use of what we call change talk. For example, their desire to change and maybe confidence in their ability to change. Now, in turn, the amount of change talk they use is a predictor for actual change. So it increases actual change. It also appears to excel in creating a positive alliance between the client and the professional. Now, this in turn is shown to have a positive impact on outcomes. It creates a good working environment, in other words. MI helps by keeping counselors from saying and doing things that actually backfire. Ironically, when we're trying to be helpful, we're often doing things that move the person away from positive change. Our involvement actually has the reverse effect that we're hoping for. It backfires. MI helps reduce those missteps.
What would be some of the advantages of veteran service officers using motivational interviewing in their regular work?
That's a great question. I think there are a number of advantages for VSOs to use motivational interviewing. But I think it also depends on their view of their job. As I prepared for this, I did a quick Google search on job descriptions for VSOs around the country, and they certainly vary. But one common denominator I saw was that most had a counseling aspect to it. Most asked VSOs to go beyond their very important job of making sure that documentation is correct, submitting the requisite claims forms and other paperwork, but help them with other problems that they present with in front of the VSO. So it helps in that counseling arena that VSOs are becoming more involved in. And using MI, once you get it, isn't a big time commitment. It's easy to fit into your current work by using what we call an MI sandwich.
Sounds delicious.
It is delicious. You use a little bit of MI, then you do what you've normally been doing anyway, and then you finish with MI. It's what they're doing in the health field all around the country and in other countries as well.
So the MI is the bread, and the meat is what the person does for their regular core responsibilities anyway.
Physicians, nurses, that'll be the core of what they've been doing, but they find it worthwhile to weave in this MI because in the long run, the little time it takes, the way it builds rapport and helps move the client to making lasting change. Now, other advantages of using MI, it fits well, I think, with the mindset of most veterans. Why? It's non-confrontational, it's non-threatening, it respects their independence and their autonomy, and it promotes partnership. All of this means less defensiveness and resistance on the part of the veteran. Also, MI has been shown to be particularly helpful for clients who experience a perceived lack of power or authority in their lives. For example, I feel that way when I'm having to fill out claims forms, something to do with benefits. I don't understand that world, and I feel like I don't have enough information. I don't have the authority. Well, MI uses techniques to invite me or invite others into that process, and it's empowering. Also, it's a standalone intervention that's quite inexpensive. It also helps reduce burnout, not for the client, but for the counselor.
How about that?
It has to do with reducing the resistance in the relationship, so the job's a little bit easier, it's a little bit lighter. Now, a few more things I want to point out of how MI can help with VSOs and their work. It's very practical. We all have things in our lives that we're interested in changing. We haven't done it yet. I call that the incongruency gap. It's a gap between where we'd like to be, our ideal selves, and where we are. For example, maybe a fitness program. And if I use myself as an example, if 10 is my ideal self with my fitness program, I'm probably these days, frankly, at something like a 6.
Okay.
There's a gap there between my actual behaviors and my ideal self. Can you think of an example that you're willing to share?
Yeah, well, I could use any of the examples you've talked about so far,
Sure.
But the one that I've been thinking about as you've talked is that I've had a smartphone for a few years now, and now I have these applications on the phone for social media, and I wonder if I'm spending too much time checking in on those applications, maybe at home or maybe even at work.
You begin to wonder if it's taking up too much of the limited time that you have each day.
Yep.
And if 10 is your ideal self on how you use social media,
Okay.
where would you score yourself 1 to 10? How far away or how close are you to that 10?
Oh, I'd say right now I'm like a 3. That's pretty bad.
You're at a 3, your ideal self is a 10. So that's the gap that if we were working together, we would begin to explore. So this is how VSOs can begin to use this with the clients in front of them, looking for those gaps, and they'll offer ideas around this, looking for those gaps and having the tools to begin to explore those gaps to help them move toward a positive change in their life.
Could you give us an idea a bit more about MI and kind of what's the core, what's the backbone of MI?
The backbone. The backbone of MI would have to be the MI spirit. That's how we refer to it. It's the MI spirit.
Right.
And let me tell you about the components of an MI spirit. There's kind of 4 vertebrae, if you will.
All right.
So the first one is partnership, which is collaboration. Here's what's meant about partnership. It's pretty key to MI, so I want to spend a little bit of time on this. It requires us to relate to the client in a non-judgmental manner. The client's experience and personal perspectives gives us the context within which change is facilitated, not coerced. We're not forcing a change. Notice the difference between these two comments a counselor might say. You've got to take your medication. Okay, not bad. And how about this one, which is much more MI adherent? What do you think you'll do about taking your medication? Let's explore that together. What do you think you'll do? Also, around partnership, clients are the undisputed experts of themselves. We're not the experts. In fact, we try to avoid the role of expert, which creates a separation that's not usually beneficial for a positive outcome. There's some exceptions to that, emergencies, for example. But typically, we try to avoid that expert and recipient model. MI is not a way of tricking people into changing. It's a way of activating their own motivation and resources for change. MI is done for and with a person, not to a person. A few more comments. It's not preachy. It's not telling someone what they should do. In fact, people are much more open to their own ideas and advice than advice they receive from others. So we want to use their own language, their own ideas as much as possible. Motivation for change is elicited from the veteran. Motivation is not imposed. You don't plug it into the veteran. You don't plug in motivation. You explore and elicit motivation. In summary around partnership, there are a wide variety of approaches to counseling. To make it simple, on one side we have a directive model, sometimes even confrontational, very directive. On the other side we have the opposite, a very following style. Just follow the lead of the client, wherever it may go. MI would be in the middle somewhere. It's what we refer to as a guiding approach. Not just following, it has some agendas, not directing, not telling them what to do. So think of MI as we go forward and talk more about it as kind of a guiding approach. So that's vertebrae number one.
Wow.
Let's go on to number two. The second vertebrae in the spirit behind MI is acceptance. Now, acceptance does not imply your approval of the person's actions. It's not what it's about. In fact, our acceptance or disapproval in this style of conversation is irrelevant. That can be a tough pill to swallow sometimes for people who are used to getting in there and fixing things and telling them how it needs to be. In MI and under acceptance, we look for what we call absolute worth. It's what Carl Rogers refers to as having an unconditional positive regard for our clients. Unconditional positive regard. It's a beautiful statement. We also talk about autonomy support, which is supporting their autonomy, their independence. Responsibility for change is left totally with the client. Individual autonomy is respected. The MI style communicates safety and support, first, through an absence of confrontation or persuasion, and second, by acceptance of the client. So again, think about these two different phrases a counselor might say. The first, you need to get into recovery right now. Not bad, not too bossy. An MI approach would be, how ready are you to change? It's not telling them, it's eliciting their own thoughts about change. So in summary, acceptance is to accept our clients as unique individuals and having an interest seeing them grow. Third vertebrae of the spirit of MI is compassion. This is empathy, having empathy for the person, which is not sympathy. It's not feeling bad for the person. It's also not identifying with their problems. It's not saying, oh, I know exactly how you feel. Been there, done that.
Yeah.
It's the ability to understand another person's frame of reference. Or as I once read, it's the being able to sense their inner world, getting inside. You know, the Greeks had 4 words for love, one of which is agape. It's pronounced a couple different ways. I'll say agape. So agape refers to the love of fellowship and community. It expresses an interest in the other person and a desire for their lives to go well. They consider it their highest form of love and unconditional love. And I think this is what is meant in MI when they talk about compassion. Now, the fourth vertebrae in the backbone
of
MI, the spirit of MI, is evocation or evocation. Evocation. To evoke, to draw out, not impose, but to draw out from the client their thoughts and feelings and ideas for solutions and ideas around change. You elicit responses. Another example of one counselor might say, you need to get a job. Fair enough. And MI adherent, someone who's practicing MI counselor, might say, what concerns you about your financial situation? It's a little more open-ended, a little bit more asking them about what's happening in their mind.
So how else does the spirit of MI play a role in conversations that you have with clients?
Well, MI, the spirit of MI, carries forward in a number of different ways. And let me just mention a few here. First, direct persuasion is not an effective method for resolving ambivalence. It's quite contrary to the spirit of MI. Confrontation is simply not consistent with MI. So we don't want to plug into them what we think. We want to evoke from them their own arguments for change. The counseling style of MI is generally laid back, even quiet. It gives the person room to explore. However, it doesn't mean it's not directive in any way at all. There is some direction to MI, and it's around keeping the conversation on track around the target of change. Not chasing anything topic that comes up, but staying to the agreed upon topic of change. There is some direction there. And that still fits under the spirit of MI. Also under the spirit, the way it plays out, readiness to change is not a permanent trait. We think of it as something that comes and goes. So there's no reason to dismiss someone as unwilling to change. It simply may not be the right time. Now, MI also, in the spirit of MI, challenges some common misconceptions around counseling someone. First, the misconception that this person in front of me ought to or should want to change. That's our agenda, not necessarily their agenda. Another misconception, clients are either motivated or they're not motivated for change.
Right.
And if there's not, there's nothing we can do for them.
Right.
Not the case.
I've heard that before.
You bet. Yeah. And MI goes right after that misconception by demonstrating over and over again that there is a way to help clients that haven't fully determined that they want to make a change. Also, clients don't like it when we tell them it's time to do it right now. That's a misconception that this is the only time you're going to have. It's just not the case, and it sets up a situation where you may be butting heads. A couple others, that a tough approach is always the best approach, kind of that tough love, not always the best approach. I'm the expert, they should follow my advice. We don't want this top-down authoritative figure. It just doesn't have as good as outcomes most of the time. And if the client decides not to change, the time I've spent with her or him could be seen as a waste. That's a misconception. Keep the door open. It's only a waste of time if we use that time in building up a wall between us.